everybody. My picture is gigantic. I'm trying to move it, but it's only letting me make it bigger. There we go. All right, so here we go. I've moved outside because the dog is driving me crazy. Things that don't happen in my classroom, right? Okay, so this chapter is all about bonding, which is really complicated and would take us a really long time if we were in class, but we're not. So we're going to do it this way. We're going to do it quickly. We're going to do it painlessly. It is really important for biology. So these things are going to come up throughout biology next year quite a bit. And that's kind of why we end the year with them. So this this section is called covalent bonding. Okay. In the first section of this chapter, we learned about bonding in general, and it's just a way for elements to become more stable. Second section was about ionic bonding, which is a type of bonding between a metal and a nonmetal, things that are far apart on the periodic table, and it's the gaining or losing of electrons. Okay, so this bond here, the co part means with or together. Okay, and then the valent means, the outer shell. Okay, so the word covalent literally means in both outer shells. Okay, so this is the sharing of electrons. Okay, so the electrons, let me make that blue. Where am I? Here we go. Electrons are shared between two elements. Okay, so the thing that holds covalent bonds together is the fact that there's an electron held together between two different elements. Okay, it's not the electric force situation in an ionic bond. Okay, so the electron is held between two elements or two atoms, and that holds them together. Make sense? Hopefully. Is held. Let me fix my grammar issues. Okay. Generally, covalent bonds happen between two nonmetals. Okay. Also, group 14. And if you think about it, and I know we didn't spend a ton of time on it, but group 14 is the carbon group. And those elements have 4 valence shells, electrons. So in order to get to 8, which is stable, they either have to find a home for 4 electrons or find 4 electrons that they can take. So all of the elements in that carbon group tend to form covalent compounds because they need to get 4 electrons, and that's a lot. It takes a lot of energy. So all of those elements especially tend to do covalent bonds where they can share. Okay, and this is because they, hang on, let me make me blue. Here we go. They need many, or at least several, electrons to fill the outer shell. Okay, finding 4 electrons is a lot. Finding 3 electrons is a lot. Okay, so there are a bunch of different ways we can form covalent bonds, and again, we would spend a whole lot of time on this and do it slightly differently. But we're here and we're going to do it this way. So a single bond is when one pair of electrons is shared. Okay, so like in a water molecule, okay, the oxygen and the hydrogens, each hydrogen shares 1 pair of electrons, so it's H2O. Okay, so that would be single bonds. In a double bond, 2 pairs of electrons are shared. Okay, so a molecule like oxygen, the oxygen you breathe. Each oxygen has 6 valence electrons, so they each need 2 more to be full, so they share 2 pairs, okay? And a triple bond is when 3 pairs of electrons are filled. I probably should go back and add the examples. So 3 pairs of electrons are shared. My example for a triple bond is nitrogen, the nitrogen gas in the atmosphere. Nitrogen gas. So like 78% of our atmosphere is made of nitrogen. Nitrogen has 5 valence electrons, so it needs to get 3 more in order to be to 8. Okay, so 2 nitrogens can share 3 pairs of electrons, and then both of them have full outer shells. Okay, the more electrons that are shared, the harder it is to break that bond. Okay, so the more energy is stored. Okay, so I've added my examples so you can see them. Okay, if you remember, we went through ionic compounds and their properties. They were like, high boiling point, high melting point, crystal structure, those sorts of things. Okay, covalent compounds are obviously different. Okay, there's a special word called molecule for a covalent compound. So a molecule is specifically a covalent compound. Okay, so it describes a covalent compound. Okay, so that's kind of, compound can work for either one, but we specifically use the term molecule for covalent ones, and we usually use the word compound to refer to ionic, but it doesn't have to be. Okay, it takes much less energy to break a single covalent bond than it does to break an ionic bond. Okay, because there's no electric forces holding it together. Okay, so a lot of things form covalent bonds in your life. No electric force holding it together. Okay, because it takes less energy to break them apart, there's lower melting points and lower boiling points. So again, your classic chemistry, find the unknown. You would do its melting and boiling points. Okay, and if it has a low one, like less than 100 degrees, then guess what? It's covalent, and you can eliminate all of the ionic compounds in the universe. Okay, because less energy is stored in the bond. Okay, oh, I didn't make that the right color blue. Try that again. Darker blue. There we go. All right. Generally, covalent things are gases or liquids at room temperature. Okay, because they have those lower melting points. They are also poor conductors because there's no electric charges involved. Okay, so they don't generally conduct electricity. Okay, no electric charge. Okay. All right, so then there's this magical thing called polar and nonpolar covalent bonds. And I know this gets really complicated, but this is the part that's really important for biology. Okay, so if you remember back in 8th grade, you guys talked about cell walls, or cell membranes, actually. And if you remember, we talked about how the cell membranes keep stuff out of the cell and control how stuff goes through the cell. And this is all because of the polar and nonpolar bonds in the cell membranes. Okay, so all covalent compounds can either be nonpolar or polar. So in a nonpolar covalent bond, we have equal sharing of electrons. Okay, so if you think of like 2 oxygen molecules, okay, so O2, 2 oxygen molecules, each substance in the bond is the same. Okay, so it's like two twins sharing something. They're much more likely to share things equally because they're the same size and the same shape. Okay, um, where is it? Text subscript. There we go. All right, so in a nonpolar bond, um, the electrons are shared equally. So there's no bully, there's no, big kid, little kid kind of situation. Okay. Examples of things with nonpolar bonds are oils. Okay. Or fats. You know how, like, you spill something on your shirt and it's an oil, it's grease stain. It doesn't come off with water. Okay. That's because it's nonpolar. Okay. Nail polish. This is why when you paint your nails, it doesn't just wash off with water because nail polish is a non-polar substance. Okay, so if you want to get off something that is non-polar, you have to use something non-polar to dissolve it. Okay, all right, so then we have something called a polar covalent bond. And this is really the reason why water does all of the amazing things it does. So in a polar covalent bond, it is unequal sharing of electrons. Okay, so generally it is between things that are not the same because, like, if you had a senior sharing something with sharing a bowl of popcorn with a kindergartner, the senior would eat more popcorn than the kindergartner would. Okay, so it's sort of the same thing with a polar covalent bond. My example here is going to be water. So if you notice, we have oxygen, which is a much bigger molecule than the hydrogen. And because of that, the oxygens sort of pull the electrons closer than the hydrogens do. Okay? Because of this, polar covalent compounds tend to conduct electricity a little bit better. And they do a lot of other things that are kind of really cool. So examples here, water is probably the most famous. Okay. So that was my example with, like, a grease stain on your shirt. That's why water doesn't take it away. So water has a high boiling point. Okay. It dissolves a lot of things. Okay. It has a high specific heat, if you remember that. And it does all those amazing things that water does that nothing else does. And that's mostly due to the fact that the bonds in it are polar covalent bonds. Okay. I'm going to post another video that's all about polar and nonpolar, so you guys can see how that works. Okay. And then I wanted to explain to you how soap works. So soap is a super gigantic molecule, and it has, so it's very, very large. And on one end is polar. Okay. The other end, or ends, depending on the kind of soap, are nonpolar. So if you have oil on your shirt or grease on your shirt, okay, the water is not going to take it off because water is polar and the grease is nonpolar. So when you add soap to your washing machine, what happens is the nonpolar end of the soap sticks to the grease on your shirt, and then sticking up from your shirt is the polar end of the soap. So then the water can come by and grab onto that. Okay, so soap is kind of an interesting thing, and that's why soap works the way it does. Okay. This is obviously very complicated, but you can handle it. In a cell wall, they have phospholipids, is what the fancy science term is. So again, it's like soap. One end of the molecule is polar and one end is nonpolar. And so it's a phospholipid bilayer. Okay, so the polar ends stick together and the nonpolar ends go on the outside of the cell and on the inside of the cell. And that's what controls what goes in and out. And that's how cells don't explode from sitting in water all day. Okay. All right. Your questions are there, 1 through 3, and number 5. We skipped number 4. Okay. And I am going to post an extra video just so you can kind of see how polar and nonpolar work, just because it is so really, really important. All right, miss you guys. See you soon, I hope.